we may be guiding the largest ecosystem restoration project in the world, sounding the wake-up call on a Category 6 hurricane, producing more tech diversity than Silicon Valley, and transforming one of the most important cities in the U.S. But FIU talent also knows that making a real impact on the big challenges we all face means entering the arena, being in the room where it happens, and leading our nation's research progress. So we're doubling down on the District of Columbia. We're here to provide diverse approaches to our federal research partners and in the halls of Congress, to convene our research collaborators from across the U.S. while creating engaging academic experiences for our students and bringing the magic of Miami to the nation's capital. FIU is a leader, redefining the American Research University, delivering on educational excellence, high social mobility, and high research impact. So join us and experience FIU.
For producing minority graduates and leading innovations in environmental resilience, brain health, and defense technologies. Here in DC, FIU showcases impactful research, offers exceptional academic experiences and internships for our students, and cultivates valuable partnerships with national stakeholders, all while bringing Miami's dynamic energy to the nation's capital. This semester, we have 3 of our Kaplan News student journalists here in Washington, covering all different aspects of current events. I'm also personally a CARTA student at FIU. I study public relations, advertising, and applied communications. And I mainly chose this school for all the different opportunities it gives its students. They're really good leaders in trying to get their students jobs and internships and just experience while they are students. And just kind of shoving them out the door afterwards and putting them out in the real world. So lovely to meet you all. Before we get started, I would like to introduce an FIU alumnus, Alexander Howard, who is the Assistant Press Secretary for Homeland Security, who will speak a little bit about himself.
Thanks for that introduction.
Of course.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Like she mentioned, my name is Alex Howard. I graduated from FIU almost a decade ago. Wow. And not too long ago, I was one of you guys. Right? I was coming up here to DC and looking and finding internships. And after I left, I graduated in the fall of 2015 in December, and in January I decided that I was going to move here, and that's when I started my internship, and I've been here ever since. So I'm really excited about the program tonight and being and answering your questions afterwards. So thank you.
So joining us tonight for our panelists is Samantha Donaldson, the Vice President of Communications at the Partnership for Public Service, where I'm also interning at.
Yes!
We also have Luisiana Perez Fernandez, the Special Assistant to the President and Senior Director of Coalitions Media. And we have Michael Newton, the Deputy Director of Communications and Operations for the Center of European Policy Analysis. So now we will get straight into the questions that we have set for today. We'll have a Q&A session at the end, just so everyone knows. So starting off, what strategies do you use to ensure that your stories reach and resonate with the right stakeholders in DC and its political and advocacy communities?
White House goes first.
Well, thank you so much for this invitation. This is great. And I just love when we are surrounded by students because it brings really a very nice energy to the things that we do. So as she mentioned, I work at the White House. So for us is, and I do specifically coalitions media, meaning I do things related to Hispanic media, youth media, LGBTQI+, Black media. So there are so many, whenever that we're trying to do stories, we really need to be very mindful of who are we pitching and how we pitching the stories. So my recommendation on that is always know your audience. So if you are doing a story, let's say that you have a story on electric vehicles. This is a good example because there's always something about electric vehicles. So it's very hard to sell those to some partners. So maybe because they think that their audience don't care. So you always have to check, how can I sell this to the Hispanic community? Are they interested in jobs creation? So if we're talking about electric vehicles, what does that mean for the community? Are they in a community that's probably overpolluted because of, this happens a lot in minority communities. So why is electric vehicles important for them? So I think like knowing your audience, when it's specifically to reporters, always think about what's their beat. They don't have a lot of resources, so you really can't waste their time. So make sure that you are focusing on the reporter, on what they're covering, if they have previous stories on it. And just make it easy for them. Like provide all the information you can. If it's something on Hispanic media, make sure that's translated so they don't have to like spend time on that. So always be mindful of like what's the need of like the reporter in your audience.
Thank you.
I'm happy to go next. Lovely to be here. Obviously, know your audience is important, but also understanding the position where you're coming from when you're telling your story is really important. So working at a think tank, we don't come from the policy making side. We come from understanding, like explaining the policy making process to all different audiences. So really when we're trying to get our message out, or really more so the message of our experts, we need to understand not only what is their stake in it, but what angle are the audience approaching it from. So if we're talking to journalists, obviously they want to explain that to a much wider audience. But if we're talking to policymakers about a broader issue that they may not be aware of, we need to kind of reverse the lens essentially and retell the story from a different perspective. And so I'd say that's particularly from the think tank point of view, but also, the other important thing to know is not only the audience, but what their interests are, but also the interests of the communicator that you're getting to them through. So, with social media influencers, that's one particular thing of like understanding their perspectives on a particular issue and why are you going to reach out to them if you want to work with them to communicate a message. What is their interest in your story, essentially. So.
Yeah, no, I just briefly to add, I totally co-sign with what the other two panelists have shared about knowing your audience, knowing, what the audience wants out of it. I think sometimes we often forget, or when I'm in meetings, it is, what are the goals we want out of this? So what are the messages? What is the end result that we want? And how do we backtrack and figure out the right strategies, the right messages, and the right audience to receive those? So the Partnership for Public Service is a nonprofit. And so we have a wide range of audiences, similar to a think tank. We have policymakers, we use media as a way to influence the general public, but we're also speaking to the federal workforce, which is wide and diverse. And so, we need to think about messages when we're trying to reach young people, and how are we interesting them in careers in government, to the more experienced leaders in government, and how are we influencing them with what we want to reach. And so to me, it comes down to audience, your goals, and your messages really should be kind of the guiding lights to the strategies that you're thinking about.
Thanks. And to build on what everyone else has said is also making sure that depending on the audience, the intended audience for your message, is making sure that these are discernible points that can be understood, right? I like to think of the grandma test or la abuelita test, right? If I can explain what I'm doing to my abuelita, then I know that what I'm doing is explaining it well in the press, because there's a lot of nuance that gets lost in the sauce, especially in such a policy-focused place like Washington, D.C., that folks outside the Beltway might not really comprehend. And so making sure that your points come across is really important. And also operating under the assumption that you might only get one bite at the apple, right? And making sure that you're clear, you're concise with your language, and that it's been approved by the lawyers. It would be my advice for that as well.
So just to give a follow-up question on what everyone said, how do you guys meet in the middle when it comes to trying to speak to different audiences that might be completely different, like two sides of the political aspect, or like someone young versus someone like older?
I'm happy to go this. So I think it's not so much about compromising on a single message, but devising strategies to reach out to those different audiences. So at SEPA, we've done a lot of work to engage with young people on national security, particularly in relation to NATO. But that doesn't mean that we need to compromise on our work towards policymakers who already have a very clear understanding of what the alliance is about and why it's important. And so it's really about, the compromise is about how much resource you can put behind each effort. And I think that's the more important decision to make. It's not about like what your actual objectives are and compromising on those, but it's just about understanding which audiences you're going to get to there.
I think it's also thinking about the language you use, and, for different audiences, you may be writing or speaking to one audience in a different way. Like you want to use different language to appeal to a younger audience versus, the way you might write something that it's directed at a policymaker. I also think to the point about what are the channels you're using to get it out. I agree, like you want to stay true to like, what are your objectives? What are you trying to reach? But how can you think creatively about the different, tactics and channels that you're reaching those different audiences, and the language choices that you're making? Also to think about like the branding choices. That's something, at the partnership, we think about our brand that we have around Go Government, which is trying to interest young people in federal careers, is, it's still true to our brand book, but we have a much different way in terms of color or language that we are approaching that audience versus, an audience that's more directed at senior leaders in government.
Thank you. So going into the different platforms, now that social media has risen exponentially throughout the last couple of years, how have the storytelling of everyone evolved, and how have you used social media for your benefit in that aspect?
So I can start with a few examples. I don't know if you have seen Carlos Eduardo Espina engaging with the president, the vice president. So there is we have an office that is in charge of digital strategy that makes sure that we are actually using the voice of influencers, the voice of celebrities to engage with different, because people are not, right now, people are not watching traditional media like before. People are finding their news on social media, on YouTube. So how can we use these big voices? I mean, talking about Carlos Eduardo, he has 10 million followers on TikTok. A video of him is more than 20 million likes. It's 20 million views. So it's very, very impactful. So how can we use our message to get to those communities by using these voices? So it's understanding that, of course, we're going to continue doing traditional media the way that we're doing, and maybe getting a little bit more creative there too, but always using now those voices.
I completely agree. I think digital media has become as critical as the traditional media in terms of getting your message out and reaching audience. I think a couple things to add. One, we've been trying at the partnership to get more of our leadership out on social media platforms. So our CEO is on LinkedIn, and how is he having a presence there and engaging with our different audiences? It's a great place too to be putting out thought leadership, particularly as opinion pages are becoming smaller in traditional news outlets. And in terms of storytelling, I think those platforms really offer a different way to tell stories, whether it's through data data and through video. And that has, I think, just unleashed some creativity for us in the communications team is how do we help put the face on the federal government through digital platforms, right? Video allows for that. We can see more of the faces of the diversity of our government and tell the stories in a different way that doesn't always lend itself to print media. So those are a couple ways we've been thinking about it and how can we, round out our efforts and not just rely on the traditional media.
I mean, I think to add to that, in the last 2 years, we've seen essentially social media like fracture when it comes to policymakers and where they inhabit. Twitter is slowly, not even slowly anymore, it's pretty quickly declining. And there are a number of experts that think essentially this election will be like Twitter's last point of relevance. When if there is one outcome, essentially it will be just an echo chamber for more conservative views, and left-wing people will leave. Or then conversely, if there is a Democratic victory, then there'll be no point for it because there won't be any policymakers in the White House listening or paying attention to it. So the reality is that what we thought might be the norm of, there'll be a singular space on the internet for policymakers to share their thoughts, for governments to share important news and updates, that might be more of an aberration than the way the internet is meant to be. And so the important thing that we've been thinking about is really trying to find the other places on the internet where communities that are interested in our work live. So when I say I do Reddit as part of my job, I get a lot of very weird looks, but we have found communities on Reddit with millions of people. So there's r/Europe, which is nearly 7 million followers. There's r/Geopolitics, which is slightly more engaged, of nearly 1 million followers. And there are plenty of other more niche subreddits where people live. Likewise, there are places like Discord and Twitch where you can find audiences that are interested in your content, but they may not necessarily be obvious to you. And so I think there's going to be a period of a couple years where everyone in this space is going to be feeling out where their communities live on the internet and also how to engage with them. Because on Reddit, you can be banned by a moderator that you've never met in your entire life, and you'll never be able to post again. So you need to be really careful with how you engage with these audiences.
And then following up on the evolving of social media and just like media in general, and now that AI has entered the chat, how do you feel that like AI is kind of making policy and like communications within policy and the government and all those things evolve? And how should it what are the certain aspects of like it influencing public opinion and things like that?
Well, I mean, part of our work is we often have to, create content or share experts that are combating, hostile narratives from Russia, from China. And I think really the role at the moment of AI is counteractive. It's being, there are bad actors that are essentially pressing hostile narratives. And so at the moment, what communicators in DC are trying to do is trying to figure out, well, how do we have to combat those narratives? But it's not so much at the point of where we're considering how do we involve AI in our content creation and decision-making process. To a personal point, I think that that is still a long way off, and that it is a tool that is going to aid in more on the data side and understanding your audience rather than actually creating the content that gets to them. You see plenty of accounts on TikTok that auto-generate content. It's of little value in the long term. It may gain short-term views, but it's not going to create any long-term value. If the user of that account wants to create long-term value, they'll have to input something of their own creative energy into it. So I think that at the moment, lots of people are trying to figure out how we can use it, but it's in more of a counteractive way rather than a proactive way.
I'll say on taking a different approach, I completely agree. We have to think about AI and how we use it responsibly, both as organizations, as a government. At the partnership last year, I had a working group that I did on my communications team to really test out what are the different AI offerings that could help with efficiencies on the communications team. I don't think AI is ever going to replace the human element, nor should it, right, around decision makings, but there are places where AI can help make it more efficient so that you can free up the time for the strategy and the creativity. Like often sometimes those mundane tasks can eat up too much time. And so where can we use AI to, help with closed captioning or transcripts on videos, right? How can it help, with some editing or the things that, again, are taking up too much time? And so we did some like test and learn approaches and came up as a team with some guidelines of, this is where we'll be using AI responsibly. Here's where it's not replacing. We still want someone to generate, social media content. AI should not be used to get AI generated images, right? Like, so just putting some guardrails, but having that kind of experiment box, I think helped us stay, on the lookout of what's going on. How can we test? We use some different newsletter subscriptions that are AI generated, in itself, like the Axios newsletters. But anyway, so I think that's one way. I think we have to do it responsibly. I think you have to put some parameters around it. But I do think there are some places where it will help and continue to help, with efficiencies, but shouldn't replace a human for a lot of the work that we're doing.
Thank you. So going a little bit into more AI conversation, in sectors like policy, government, and advocacy, how do you think it can be used to engage your audience as opposed to just like use it as a background tool when it comes to just communicating with your audience in general?
I think kind of like what the point that she was given, a little bit of course, it's not going to replace the human touch, the decisions that are being made, but more like there are a lot of day-to-day tasks that I think like many companies, the federal government can benefit. And right now, like AI exists, like the federal government is using AI. So I think it's just a matter of like understanding how far can we take it, but also how can we use it to prevent other things. So I think when we talk about disinformation, like a lot can be tied to AI. So how can we make sure that we're also using it to counter that disinformation, like to make sure that people are getting the right information, especially for the Hispanic community? I think there is a lot of disinformation that we don't have the tools or we have very little tools to make sure that we are countering it and that we are giving people the information right away. So I think that's where like AI can play a very big role on how we are getting the information in a faster way to our communities.
And then just a follow-up on disinformation in general and looking at like the counter of the benefits of AI. How do you manage the growing spectrum of just vast misinformation and just like different types of conversations that are happening in the media because of AI or because of social media and things like that?
I think I have seen in the last few years, I thought like right now we were going to be seeing more disinformation than before. I have seen a shift a little bit because now I think there are more resources to combat them. Speaking specifically for the Latino community, for Hispanic media, I've seen how news desks, networks are putting like a real effort to verify information right away in Spanish. We didn't see that 4 years ago. So there has been a big change, and I think like there also has been a very good education process within the community, within like our younger people to their parents, to their grandparents. We're seeing that, like I see it in my family. So I think like we're gonna start seeing more of that. And you know, I think it's an effort that it takes the whole community to combat.
I think off of that, when it comes to that the nodes that disinformation has to penetrate people's lives, I think those are growing at an exponentially fast rate. That it is things like labeling, it won't be able to catch up as quickly as the content is being generated and then maybe even taken down. And I think what obviously education continues to be an important thing when it comes to media literacy, but it's also about giving people the tools to be able to communicate with their peers, with their families about why something is maybe misleading or false, and really helping media literacy, but more, in a more proactive sense, rather than just telling people, oh, okay, this is how you can tell something is disinformation or not. And again, with a more fractured internet, there are far more places that you have to monitor. And this is not only in terms of social media, but it's also in terms of news outlets, as we've seen from the RT investigation, by the Department of Justice. There's news washing of a bunch of stories everywhere, and that will just continue to proliferate with AI, which is able to generate if not the same narrative, then multiple versions of the same narrative, and then populate that on different places across the internet.
So now moving on to a little bit about your career aspects. What are the biggest challenges you guys have faced earlier on in your career, and how did you guys overcome them, and what lessons did you gain from those experiences?
Maybe want to start at the end?
You go ahead.
Okay. I think from my own personal experience, so obviously you can tell that I did not grow up in the US from my accent, but coming to the US, I did have to have a cultural shift when it came to talking to the audiences that I live with. One thing, for example, it's kind of small, but active versus passive voice in the UK versus US has very, very strong different connotations. In the UK, active voice is seen as not intellectual. You do not use active voice for academic work, for media work. It's seen as poor English, essentially. So passive voice is seen as the higher register. Coming to college, I kept on getting Bs because I refused to use active voice. So I changed that immediately. But it was very much a shift. That's something that I had to overcome. It's not a linguistic challenge in terms of learning a new language, but it was learning a new register. And that lesson has continued with me as you see policymakers use active voice language because it's direct. It tells you what to do. It tells you how they're feeling, how you should feel, and what is the action that needs to happen after this.
I think, probably not surprisingly, as a woman, coming up, in any organization, definitely had a sense of imposter syndrome. And, do I belong in this table? Do I belong, making these decisions, particularly as I took on, higher leadership roles? So the sense of confidence of, can I do this job? And I think it took, and I know there's a question on there, like conversations with mentors, particularly female mentors who have navigated, those careers. Oftentimes in DC, you can be, one of few women in spaces. I think that's improved a lot, particularly in different communications roles. And so I think that is a challenge I've had to navigate and something I had to personally kind of find my confidence, find my ability to, remind myself that I do have the experience and the know-how to do this, and everyone is faking it till they make it, right? In most places, particularly in DC. And so, like what decision I'm going to make is the right of what I have in the moment. And so that's just, I think, something for myself as I've gone through my career and tried to, be mentors, to people too, is just trying to coach them and get people, to say that you do have the knowledge, you do belong in this chair, you do belong in this room. And so that's helped me, along the way.
And to build up a little bit on what she was saying is that, yes, it's important to have mentors, but it's also equally as important to have anti-mentors, right? These are folks who I've come across in my career, and I see the way that they've handled a subordinate or someone, and they've, frankly, treated someone like crap, or treated me like crap, and I'm like, I'm not going to stand for that. When I'm in a position to have a team underneath me. So it's really important, not only that, but just, to carve out that space. Like, I'm from Miami. I went to FIU, spent a lot of Friday nights at Jasmine's, doing sake bombs. Right? The culture shock from Miami to DC was a big one. and it was a big one to overcome, right? And just going back to what was said about messaging, right? I almost felt like I had to like message myself differently up here than I would back home, right? No more besitos to say hello, like none of that stuff. It's just like cut and dry, right? Like, and that took me a while to overcome. And when I go back home, a lot of my friends, they sense it. They're like, hey, what's wrong? Like, are you good? I'm like, yeah, I'm fine. It's just being here for such a long period of time, it kind of desensitizes you to that Miami aspect. The other thing that I would say is, make the space, right? Go out to coffees, reach out to people. If you're looking for an internship, reach out to someone that you're interested in a company or a think tank or in government that you're really wanting to, because that's basically how most of us started here, right? Is just, reaching out to someone. Don't think of it as someone giving you a hand out. Think of it as someone giving you a hand up, right? And it's because of those people that made the space that we're all here today.
And I just gonna add a little bit on that. I'm from Venezuela, so I was born, raised, and I went to college in Venezuela. So for me, it was a cultural shock to understand like how professional life work here, like meaning the coffees, the networking, the mentors. That was something that I was not used to when I was in Venezuela. So that's been a challenge. Even today, it's been a challenge. So I piggyback on what Alex said on do the coffees. Like, for me, it was like, why would this person sit down with me and have coffee? Like, that makes no sense. But it's actually something that you need to do. Like, don't be afraid, just do it. And then on the mentors, and I know maybe answering a little bit of that upcoming question, think about those mentors, about somebody that it doesn't have to be in your like career. Like, think about somebody that's also outside of your field work field, because like you can learn so much from them. I do have like some mentors, but it's been mentors that are not like, oh, I'm gonna pick this person as my mentor. It's not like that. It's somebody that you get to know in the process, and that they become mentors. Like when they give you an advice that you're like, oh, wait a minute, this person has been like telling me this all this time. But I think like for me, that was a challenge. It's still a challenge. So I really encourage people like to find the time to do those meetings.
So then going into the conversation of mentors, how have they helped you kind of form your decisions, and what role has it played into your career success and just success in general in life?
For me, has been, it's always about how they see things differently from like the way that I'm seeing. Like sometimes I remember one time I was debating between two jobs, and this person just said to me like, listen, you're taking a risk. Like, are you gonna take a risk that is gonna have high reward, or are you gonna take the high reward, low risk job? Like low reward, low risk. So I remember that, and that really helped me. Like, he didn't tell me, do this or do that. It was more about like, that person is going to be able to put you in a different perspective that you probably are not seeing, because you are just like on circles, like trying to take your decision. So use them. It doesn't always have to be that mentor that you always have. Like, just find people on the way that can help you shape some of like your views and your decisions. So yeah.
I'd also say, if you're starting out on the process, it's not going to like there's going to be someone that's immediately going to shine to you. It tends to be maybe a year, 2 years afterwards, you stay in touch with that person, and then you kind of form that relationship, either, as you mentioned, because they're no longer in your sector and you've gone on and done something else, or if they're still part of your sector, you're still seeing them occasionally. But also to that point too, it is good to have a peer perspective from people that are going through the same process. They they can either help reinforce your decision that, you know, this is maybe the right view, or they can really be like, I don't think I would do that, maybe you shouldn't do it, and kind of, it's a little bit of a group decision there, or group input.
Yeah, I think, you know, my mentors, unlike your friends, right, who can be your greatest hype person, I think the mentors can really help push you and ask the questions maybe you hadn't seen, offer the different perspective. You know, I've used them when I've had challenges at work where I need to talk through something where someone kind of, you know, has been in a similar role or understands. And so I think that's been incredibly helpful to have that like special sacred space and relationship to do that. I also put a plug in for reverse mentorship. I think there's so much that, you know, senior people can learn from the folks around in this office, and have done so at the partnership of, you know, having that relationship and really learning from people who are more junior is so invaluable as well. And so just want to put a plug that it doesn't have to be a top down. It can be very much a bottom up relationship.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just remembering the time that I taught my mentor, who at the time was a congressman, how to use Twitter, and I immediately regretted it afterwards. But it's also like finding people that like to build on what everyone else has said. Finding someone that challenges you and pushes you to be better, right? I have now in being here so long, I have a committee of mentors essentially. So I know which one will give me what advice, and so I try my best to not kind of like shop around for the advice that I want. So like I know that if I really want, you know, solicited, unfiltered advice, that I can go to Joe, and Joe will tell it to me straight, right? If I want something a little bit more diplomatic, right, I'll go to my friend Frances, right, and she'll and she'll Frances is in the back. I just use your name as an example, but it's just really important just to have a little bit of diversity and in what you who it is that's giving you that advice as well.
Thank you. So then, looking forward in your career, how do you see your career evolving, especially as the media and the communications platforms evolve as quickly as they have been, and what goals are you looking forward for the next phase in your professional life?
Yikes. I mean, it's always an evolving field, right? When ChatGPT came out, you know, a year and a half ago at this point, almost 2 years ago, right? There were many people that I was working with at the time that were very adverse. They're like, what is this? Like, no, we're not going to use this. And it took months of like internal deliberations. This was before my work in government. Months of internal deliberations to get people to a point where they were comfortable using ChatGPT in the workspace, right? And so I think it's just always giving yourself room to learn and to adapt to the changing media landscape.
I think I'll take a slightly different turn, which is a lot of my career I spent working on Russia and Ukraine. And so really, I think a large part of my career trajectory will be to do with Russia's invasion of Ukraine, whether that's where I'm still working at the Center for European Policy Analysis, or if it's another think tank, or if it's in government, or if it's in other nonprofit work. I think that's probably going to be a big driver in how my career progresses and the kinds of things that I'm able to do. I think building a broad base of skills, both technical and interpersonal skills, is really important. And then it's up to you to decide where you want to move with those. I've continued to try and keep as broad a range as possible. But I think the news is essentially going to decide where my career goes.
Yeah, I think for any comms person, I think, right, to keep up with the evolving, but I often say, like, we are quick to adapt and know a topic, right? Like we're pretty dangerous. We may like not know deep, but we can know wide. And so for me, my guiding light has been, what can I do that's very mission focused, that I feel like I'm making a difference every day through using my communications talents. And so I think that will continue to be my North Star. But I'll also say, I think coming out of, the post-COVID time, and I think also just being around, younger millennials and Gen Z, I've really tried to center myself and like work, not centering my life, which is hard in DC and hard as a communications professional. But how do I find more grounding as a human and understand that there is more to life than just work? And that can be very difficult in comms where you have to be on a lot. But that is something I think I'm continuing as I look forward in my career of like, where can I don't like the word balance because I think balance is really hard to achieve, but where can I find something that's more centered and allows me to be the person I am beyond work, but still, be, doing my best at the job? And as a leader, how am I leading a team that feels like they have those same priorities and really making sure that they can balance the many identities that they bring to work and they bring outside the workplace. So I think that's something that's been, more focused for me as I look to the future.
Thank you. And then I just wanted to follow up on how Alex, you talked about dissent and like how there's like always like there might be a pushback on different like platforms that come up or different things. How do you manage that, especially in like a professional setting where you have to be nice and professional, but at the same time, something will work and you want to just push it so you guys can do it?
Yikes. Wow. I try to be very diplomatic, both with our internal stakeholders and our external stakeholders, especially. Just because, like, at the end of the day, these are the people that you're going to be working with, right? And so, I like to, count to 10 before I send an email. And then oftentimes I will like delete it and then say something a little bit more diplomatic, right? It's the Miami in me, right? But I would say that it's important to remember, where you are and where you came from, but also make sure that doesn't just define who you are as well, because you don't want to be kind of pigeonholed in that regard. I think that being able to effectively communicate is important, and being able to really tailor that message to your audience is important. And knowing very well that half of the people that read your products are going to agree with you, and half of them are going to disagree with you and tell you that you're wrong. And knowing that, you just have to blur out the noise and just keep doing the work is important.
I just want to add that it's important that remember you are in a position for a reason, and your background, it's bringing to the decision table things that probably another person won't be able to see. So for me, it's very important to always trust my voice. Like when you find situations where somebody's pushing back, where, I don't know, when somebody is telling you, not telling you directly, but they're making a decision that there's something that clicks for you and says, wait a minute, for my community, that doesn't mean that. If you are there in those rooms and you are seeing something that is wrong and that is going to harm your community, raise your voice. Trust your God. Yeah, make sure that you are doing it in the right place, but always trust that what you know about your community, nobody else does. So my advice is always think about how you can say it, but say it in a way that you can find some balance and on negotiating what exactly works for your community.
Sorry, we just saw what looked like Thomas Jefferson. Two Thomas Jeffersons dressed up walk by. We were like, oh. When in DC, I know. I was like, what a moment.
And then I also want to bring the conversation of like, what specific skills have you gained and have you thought that are most critical in your job so far, and how did you acquire them and develop them throughout your careers? Go ahead.
I'm gonna say negotiating, managing people in a way that is not just you as a manager, but also managing people's personalities. That's something that's gonna help you a lot, especially here in DC. Everybody's different. Everybody comes from a different place. They come from a different background. So understanding priorities, understanding who's who, that has helped me a lot. And of course, we work in an environment that everything happens very quick. So understanding what are your priorities, making sure that you understand why you do what you do. It's also like helpful, like for future positions and jobs.
I'd say, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, I'm not a lawyer, but I work with a lot of them, and I've gotten really good at kind of preempting what they will say. So when it comes to drafting specifically, there's the message that we want to say, but depending on what the lawyers say, they can completely water down that message. And so just being able to kind of like anticipate like where those edits are going to be coming in, and kind of like, as to Luciana's point earlier, of kind of like making that space and advocating for what's best for your community. And so being able to kind of anticipate what internal stakeholders will say before the message goes externally is really helpful.
A couple of things to add. I don't think as a comms person, advocacy person, I always say number one skill is to be a strong writer. If you're able to write clearly, concisely, in plain language, I think that is such a foundational skill. Building on, like understanding where people are. I think really understanding and building relationships to have that influence, both internally with folks and externally. Particularly when it comes to media and media relations, how you build those relationships. And yeah, I completely agree. Like, figuring out how to get and, anticipating. I think the other one I would add is a skill around what I like to call wise risk taking. I think to be, at the cutting edge of communications, you need to take some risk. And I say wise, to make sure for me in a nonprofit that it's on brand, it's on mission. But I think some of the most successful outcomes I've been able to have leading my team is when we've really pushed it and really thought big and kind of took a risk for us, or a risk for our organization that's paid off. And so how do you create that space that allows you to take the risks, that will have big rewards ultimately for your organization?
I think when it also comes to understanding people and where they're from and what they're bringing to the table, also try and understand their job and the processes that they have to go through. So this is the same for the lawyers. Like from my perspective, it's more about technical skills. So whether it's a website developer or a graphic designer, understand their job, understand how much time it takes for them to do a thing. And that's going to give you really good skills when it comes to managing a team, managing how the team operates, and also, and at the end of the day, reaching your final goal. Secondly, I'd say, build relationships, but also carefully consider how much time and energy you can put into maintaining those. Like one long-term, well-maintained relationship can very much be far more beneficial than kind of 5, somewhat failed relationships, even if they may have had initially good outcomes. This is particularly when, say, you're working with vendors. You can tend to get better deals, or get them to work on a shorter timeline, particularly when it comes to hosting events or doing projects. That can be very beneficial in DC, especially when there's a lot of other tasks they may have on their mind.
So now we're gonna open the floor up for questions. So if anyone has a question they want to ask our panel.
You go. Okay. I have a few, but we can alternate. So the younger generation is getting a lot more engaged in like media communications and like current conversations. So like how have you seen in your industries any particular shifts in your actions because of younger generations like engaging in media, or how has it changed like the trajectory of like your work?
Happy to kick that off. So in 2022, we did the NATO Youth Summit, which was specifically designed to get younger millennials and Gen Z involved in understanding what NATO is. At that conference, I suggested that we get a TikTok influencer. He was, he had a strong audience, about 100,000 people. He did a stand-up segment. He did a keynote. It was really great. He made a little video for it. Video got a couple 100,000 views. It was a really great outcome. Jump to July, where you now see NATO having like a whole bunch of influencers that they've brought to DC to cover the conference, and they're putting them alongside the traditional media. That was, my first time working with influencers. That was, NATO's most likely their first time as well. They were a little bit hesitant. And so I think that's, definitely seeing some kind of push to engage not only them as being part of the audience and actually considering them as part of the audience, but also engage them in the creation process too.
I mean, it's similar. I mean, government TikTok has been popping off for sure, which is amazing to see, people explaining this like very dense policy out there in like really, consumable ways. So that's something we're keeping an eye on. Clearly, the federal government can't be on TikTok just yet. And so, I think that's a space we're monitoring. I think at the partnership, we're thinking about like, is there the space that we can own for TikTok and help the government, share the work that they do since they're not able to through that channel. But, since we do have work that is geared at young people, we've been thinking about what are the right messages and ways to talk about government? How are we featuring more young people that work in government? Unfortunately, only 7% of the federal government is under age 30. And so those stories can be scarce to find, but we do find them and try to feature them. We're also trying to, to identify influencers, but also celebrities that can appeal to more, a younger generation. So last week, we do an awards program at the partnership that's known as the Oscars of Government Service. And so, how do we really bring in more celebrities to tell the stories of these amazing public servants is something we've been pursuing. But definitely, it's an area for us to continue to grow.
Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah, so a lot of like risks, a lot of like different career fields too. How did you all navigate, like, just how did you and how do you navigate like finding and taking those risks in your career journey, like educational wise, like going to grad school, then you're worried about your jobs, like going from an internship to picking a job in what field it is, and just how did you navigate and get to where you are?
I think, so when I came to the US, it was in 2011, and I was already graduated from college, and I started like, I didn't work in politics, like I was an immigrant, so like I was doing anything, so we were trying to survive. And I remember like taking an opportunity from a friend who said she knew I was trying to look for like volunteer opportunities, a way to like kind of like get connected with organizations. And she took me to this organization, FLIC, the Florida Immigrant Coalition. They had like this campaign to get to grant driver's license for undocumented immigrants. And I started like volunteering. And I remember it was a sacrifice because I remember I would work like all day and then I would go after 8 p.m. on Mondays to meet with these people. But I did that for 2 years. And it was the way that I got where I am right now, because I got to meet people there. I got to connect with people that I never thought that I would. And from there, I got my first job. And, it was that sacrifice that, like, I can go home. I know I'm tired from working all day. I can just go home, or I can just go and meet these people and help and see what I can do. So those decisions are never easy. And then later in our careers, you are like in positions that you're like, should I continue studying or should I continue? And I remember I started studying at FIU at some point and I didn't finish it. Sorry, guys. I didn't have all to know. But it was something that actually now that I think about it, I'm like, I should have. But who knows? Maybe I know it would have taken me to another path. But it's those decisions that, like, should I continue studying and I know it's going to take me to a good place, or should I just continue, like, I don't have time, just let me go through my career right now. But it's never an easy decision. I think that's why, like, the mentors, like conversation we had earlier, helps a lot on, like, understanding those moments on big decisions that you have to take, that you don't have to take them only by yourself. Like, you can take it with a community that can help you see what's best for you.
To expand a little bit on that, sometimes you have the privilege of making a decision. Sometimes a decision has been made for you and you have to adapt and overcome. In 2016, I was working on a political campaign, and everyone thought that this campaign was going to win, and that the election results did not go the way that we anticipated. And so I came back to my little studio in DC, kind of like dejected a little bit, but I started looking for work because I thought that there was going to be this administration, and this administration never happened because the election went the other way. And so it's being able to adapt, right? And job hunting sucks, and especially if you don't have a job. And it's one of those things where you make do with what you can find, and being able to sometimes advocate for yourself, right? And following 2016, I applied for over 438 jobs after the election. I still keep that spreadsheet as a reminder. I got 2 interviews because the job market here was so oversaturated with people from my party. And, if you think about it, the Obama administration had just ended. The White House had gone to the opposition party. The majorities in the House and the Senate had flipped to levels that hadn't been seen since the 1920s. So there was an influx of people from my party that were looking for jobs. And it was just a complete oversaturation. And I looked and saw and tried to apply, and I ultimately found a job working at a government affairs firm. And it wasn't because I had applied, it's because I had literally just gone there and said, hey, you guys need someone that works in communications because you're doing all this government affairs work, but it's not really as effective, because you can be 2 or 3 times more effective if you bring in communications as a component to the work that you're doing. And so I literally fought for that space. And I, ultimately convinced, this group of, 7 older white men that can't rotate a PDF to take a chance on this, this Latino guy from Miami with a big attitude and big dreams. And I was able to make that space. So it's don't be afraid to play the hand that you're dealt, right? It's a privilege to be able to make decisions. Oftentimes, those decisions are made for you, and you just have to adapt and not be dissuaded by those.
Does you want this question? Go ahead.
Yeah, I wanted to ask something going back to misinformation. You specifically were talking about how misinformation has found like much more ways to kind of like penetrate into people's daily lives. And I kind of wanted to ask, how do you see those developments going alongside the decline in media literacy rates across the country? I feel like oftentimes we're talking about media literacy and we're talking about older folks, or you were talking about, you know, immigrants, because some people don't grow up with the same level of internet engagement as others. But what we're seeing right now in a lot of like at the classroom, like K to 12, is a lot of kids not understanding basic English passages. So, and that really translates a lot into social media. So how do you see misinformation education in the early generations and the new generations going forward?
Well, I think, frankly, unless there are kind of more robust steps, you're going to see a population that is very susceptible to false narratives. It's also not only just the fact that it's about, you know, news stories that might be erroneous, written in a newspaper that's then published online, or at least a website that is pretending to be a newspaper. It's about intermingling of content and kind of combining that in lots of ways. I think one way, it sounds kind of dumb, but you see those TikTok videos where they've got like Subway Racer on the right-hand side. You know, like, if you combine that with a news story that might be erroneous, somehow you're going to get people to watch it. Or it's about blending narratives into actual, like, more like creative content. So whether that's like TV shows or cartoons, if you're able to generate that content more profusely at a lower cost, which is essentially the strategies that China and Russia and Iran have done previously, but with less sophisticated, you know, botnets and those sorts of things, they've been able to generate and amplify messages at low cost. That's going to have a much higher impact. So essentially, you are seeing somewhat of a transition of those same kind of practices and strategies, but to just new platforms and new content types. But ultimately, end of the day, as you highlight there, since the pandemic, there has been a decline in, like, not just media literacy, like actual literacy rates. And the reality is that it will take somewhat of a unified effort, not only on the part of educators to help people understand these, but it will. You know, there are plenty of experts that will say, to the point, that it's about the online spaces that host these messages and how can we maintain that. And there are all sorts of very intricate but also simple policy arguments out there for what policymakers, nonprofits, and news organizations can do to kind of combat that.
I think we have room for one more question.
If I could just have one more follow-up question. You were talking about the Hispanic community, how they're very susceptible to misinformation, but also just like to AI and those kind of things. How do we effectively communicate with a generation and the demographic that is like so not used to? For example, I'm from Cuba and we didn't grow up with internet. How do you kind of like communicate and create a space where people are able to better understand media literacy, misinformation when they see it? How do you create that, and why is it so important for the Hispanic community?
So I think one of the things that we've been trying to do is to identify who are those on social media that are giving accurate information in quick time. Like, I don't know, because the way that it works with traditional media is that, and I saw this a few times, you see there is a light and it starts spreading in the community. Sometimes it takes like a little bit for like the traditional media to actually, because I mean, they need to like make sure that they get the information, that they put it out there. They're not going to do a breaking news. Maybe they're going to do it like at 6:30 for the newscast. But identifying those that are on social media that can go on it like very quick is key for the community. I saw it in my family, like an aunt telling me, oh, I saw this, and it's like, tía, eso no es verdad. And then like my cousin being like, oh, here is this video, like, mom, this is gonna help you like to understand this. Like, that's the way that I'm seeing it. And I think it's what I said before, it's like very intergenerational. Like, how can we help our parents and our grandparents mostly, because I think like parents are already like in a good place, but like our grandparents to like, and yeah, they are not on the internet, but they are like seeing the information, they are getting it from somebody. So like trying to get to them as quick as we can is the way. TikTok, I think it's the place that I've seen it like going faster, like with a counter to try to counter like disinformation. And like those sharings, like WhatsApp groups, like that's another place that we've been trying, to put the information out there. I was at another job years ago, and one of the ideas I had was like, let's create a WhatsApp group, because a lot of the information that is running through the Latino community is like we are communicating through WhatsApp. Like, it's crazy. A few days ago, somebody said, I just downloaded WhatsApp. And I was like, what? Like, how? Because for us, it's a thing that's been since forever. So, so we created this WhatsApp group to counter disinformation, like to put things there as fast as like we could. And then when we saw something, we say something like, no, that's not true. That's like, this is what's really happening. So, it's finding those ways to connect to the community where they are. And I think that's what's key, like to understand where is the community getting the information and how can we actually be on those spaces as well.
If I could briefly add something on behalf of a colleague of mine who did a trip to with the State Department to Mexico around their elections, specifically on disinformation. One of the places of finding people where they are to combat these narratives is telenovelas in Mexico. Take Mexico as the largest producer of Spanish language entertainment in the world. And so, this is one proactive way that you can find those communities, particularly on the older generations as well, to be able to, through what I mentioned about combining content with narratives, you can do it in the reverse as well. But it takes a little bit more creative thinking, I think, to come up with something proactive. Yeah.
Thank you. So thank you everyone for joining us. Lastly, I would like to point out Ines Trier. She's the interim director of the College of Engineering, Computing, and the executive director of the Applied Research Center, who joined us today.
So thank you, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Thank you to our panelists. There's still a few pieces of food if people want to just enjoy and mingle, but I appreciate you all coming today. And if